Her daughter-in-law said, "She doesn't belong in our family photo," smiling for the camera. Marion Foster, widow and mother-in-law for 30 years, didn't step aside. Lydia, the woman she'd welcomed into the family, thought the slight would be forgotten. By morning, the deed to the house and every key would be back in Marion's possession. She'd been their host and their matriarch. Now, she was the guardian of her own home, and when they came to hang that photo, they'd find the walls and the house gone from their reach. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. I froze halfway up the staircase, my hands still resting on the rail. From the living room below came Clara's voice, low but unmistakable. "She doesn't belong in our family photo." The words slid under my skin like ice water. For a moment I thought I'd misheard, but then Liam murmured something I couldn't catch, and Clara replied with a little laugh. Light, casual, the kind people use when they want to pretend cruelty is just a joke. I stood there, invisible in my own son's house, staring at the framed pictures along the stairwell. Liam's wedding, their trips to the coast, birthdays, holidays. In most of them, I was there on the edge of the frame, a polite smile fixed in place, like someone who'd wandered into the wrong party but was too embarrassed to leave. I forced myself to keep walking, smoothing my face into something neutral. The smell of rosemary and roasted chicken filled the kitchen, and I pasted on the smile I'd been perfecting for years. "Mom, you made it," Liam said when he finally looked up. He kissed my cheek, already glancing over my shoulder for someone else. Clara emerged from the dining room, perfectly put together as always, a glass of white wine in her manicured hand. "Annette," she said, giving me the kind of smile you give to a neighbor you barely know. "Coat in the hall closet, please. We're just about ready for picture." I nodded, setting my purse on the bench by the door. My heart was thudding hard enough to make me lightheaded, but I kept my voice even. "Smells wonderful in here." The rest of the family trickled in. Liam's 2 kids tearing through the hallway, Clara's parents chatting loudly in the living room, a few neighbors who seemed to have become regular fixtures at these gatherings. I stood near the window, watching the yard fade into the dim November light. The leaves were nearly gone, branches stripped bare. When it was time for the photo, everyone shuffled into the living room. Clara took charge immediately, directing people where to stand, fixing collars, smoothing skirts. Her voice was brisk, efficient, as if she were arranging a business meeting instead of a family moment. "Annette, maybe you could stand." She paused, her eyes scanning the group. "On the far end, by the lamp, that way everyone fits." I stepped into place. From where I stood, the glare from the lamp hit my cheek, washing me out. It didn't matter. I smiled when the camera clicked, because that's what you do. You smile even when you feel yourself disappearing. I noticed the subtle glances, Clara's quick check to see if I was in frame, Liam's distracted gaze, the polite nods from Clara's parents as though acknowledging a distant relative. The kids squirmed, already looking bored. When the last picture was taken, conversation burst back into the room. People moved toward the dining table, plates clinking, wine pouring. I murmured something about needing fresh air, and slipped toward the door. Outside, the cold hit me like a wall, the kind that makes your eyes water instantly. I stood on the porch, hands in my coat pockets, watching the bare branches sway against the gray sky. My breath clouded in front of me, the only thing in the world that seemed solid. I thought about all the times I'd told myself to let things slide, to be gracious, to be the bigger person. How many little cuts had I ignored, pretending they didn't sting? Through the window I could see the family gathering around the table. Laughter floated through the glass, muffled and distant. They looked like a picture-perfect family, and maybe to them but I wasn't part of that picture. Not really. Annette walks away from the gathering, determined to make a change but unsure how to begin. The family photo wasn't just a photo, it was the final straw in a long line of disrespect. The heater in my car rattled weakly, blowing lukewarm air as I drove home in the dark. The road was slick with a thin sheen of frost, headlights from oncoming cars, slicing through the cold night. Clara's words played on a loop in my head, sharp and deliberate now, no longer muffled by walls or distance. I tried to push them aside, but they clung to me like burrs. At home, I set my purse on the kitchen counter and stood in the stillness. The clock above the stove ticked softly. No laughter here, no clinking of glasses, just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint groan of the house settling. I poured myself a cup of tea, letting the steam curl against my face. My hands curled tighter around the mug as memory after memory pushed forward, the time Clara corrected the way I folded towels, right in front of Liam. The Christmas she forgot to tell me about the matching sweaters, so I was the only one in plain red. The birthday dinner where she'd ordered me a salad instead of asking what I wanted, because as she'd said with a tight smile, "It's lighter and you'll feel better." I'd laughed those moments off, told myself she meant well, told myself not to make trouble for Liam, but there's a line you cross without knowing it, where patience stops being grace and starts being surrender. I'd been surrendering for years. I moved into the living room and sat on the edge of the couch. My eyes drifted to the framed photograph on the mantel. Thomas and I standing in front of the house we built from the ground up. His arms slung around me, both of us sunburned and sweaty from planting the maple trees out front. That house had been our sanctuary, the proof of everything we'd worked for. I remembered the day Liam asked if he and Clara could move in for a while. Thomas was already gone by then, and the house felt too big for me alone. I'd said yes without hesitation, happy to have my son under my roof again. Over time the lines blurred, whose house it was, whose rules mattered. Somehow my home had turned into theirs, and I'd learned to tread lightly in my own kitchen, in my own living room. Tonight though, that picture, Clara deciding who belonged and who didn't, had snapped something inside me. I set my tea down and went to the small desk in the corner. The bottom drawer stuck a little, as it always had, before sliding open with a groan. Inside, beneath a stack of utility bills and old letters, was a plain manila envelope. I slid it out carefully and set it on the desk. The paper inside was crisp, the black ink still bold, the deed to the house. My name, no one else's. I traced my fingers over the embossed seal, feeling the texture press into my skin. In all these years of giving in, of swallowing my pride for the sake of keeping the peace, I'd forgotten this, forgotten that I still held the one thing Clara couldn't control, my home, The thought scared me, but it also lit something deep in my chest. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for them to change, to stop hoping that respect would just appear if I smiled enough, stayed quiet enough. The air in the room seemed sharper now, charged with possibility. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the one on the edge of the frame. I felt centered, present. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of the decision forming in my mind. Annette pulls out the deed to the house, deciding it's time to make a bold move. I couldn't let Clara get away with this anymore. My plan had to be more than just words. By morning, the quiet determination that had kept me awake all night hardened into something sharper. My coffee went cold on the kitchen table as I sat there, staring at the manila envelope, its edges curled slightly with age. I had spent years telling myself the house was just walls and a roof. But now it felt like the last piece of myself I hadn't given away. The phone book in the drawer was dusty, the pages curling, but I found the number I needed, an old colleague of Thomas's, now one of the most respected real estate attorneys in town. When the receptionist told me he could see me that afternoon, I felt an odd mix of relief and dread. The office was downtown, in one of those brick buildings with polished wood floors and the faint smell of lemon oil. The receptionist's heels clicked as she led me to a corner office lined with law books and framed photographs. "Annette," Michael said warmly, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm, his eyes curious. "It's been a long time." I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, the sound of it creaking under my weight. For a moment I wasn't sure where to begin. Then it all came out. How Liam and Clara had moved in, how the house had slowly stopped feeling like mine, how Clara's latest slight had been the breaking point. Michael listened without interrupting, his hands folded on the desk. When I finished, he leaned back, studying me. The good news is, Annette, the property is still yours. Legally, you have every right to decide who lives there, or if it's sold. The word sold landed like a stone in my stomach. I don't want to sell, I said quickly. Thomas and I built that place with our own hands. Selling would feel like erasing us. He nodded. Then don't. But leverage it. If they want to stay, they need to agree to your terms. You can make it formal, written conditions for tenancy, even a timeline. If they won't agree, you can evict them. It's your call. I stared at the polished wood of his desk, my reflection faint in the surface. The idea of eviction felt brutal, but the alternative was worse. Another year, another decade of being invisible in my own home. Michael slid a blank legal pad toward me. Write down what you want, exactly what you want. We'll draft it into something that gets their attention. My pen hovered for a moment before moving. Respect. Clear boundaries. No more decisions made without me. My hand shook, but the more I wrote, the steadier it became. When we were done, Michael said, I'll prepare the letter, but Annette, once this goes out, there's no going back. Are you ready for that? I thought about Thomas, about how fiercely he had protected the life we built. He wouldn't have let anyone, least of all someone married into the family, decide whether I belonged. The memory steadied me. Yes, I said. I'm ready. Driving home, the late afternoon sun slanted low across the windshield, turning the frost on the fields to glitter. For the first time in years, I felt like I was steering my own life instead of sitting in the passenger seat. That night, I sat at the same kitchen table where Thomas and I had once argued over paint colors and laughed about the crooked fence posts he swore were artistic. I opened my laptop and read the letter Michael had sent over for approval. It was brief, almost cold in its formality, but that was the point. No emotion for Clara to twist, no openings for Liam to negotiate away, just the facts. The house was mine, and it was no longer available to them under the current arrangement. My finger hovered over the mouse, the send button glowing at the bottom of the screen. I could almost hear Thomas's voice, steady, certain, telling me to do what needed to be done. With a deep breath, Annette sends a letter to Liam and Clara, informing them that the house is no longer available to them. I handed them the letter and felt the weight of years of resentment settle into my bones. The late afternoon light spilled across the living room rug as I waited, the envelope balanced on my lap. My palms were damp despite the cool air drifting in from the half-open window. Outside, the maple leaves rattled against each other in the wind, restless, like me. The sound of tires on gravel announced their arrival. A moment later, the front door opened, and Liam stepped in, his jacket half unzipped. Clara followed, her heels sharp against the hardwood. Neither of them smiled. "We got your email," Liam said, his voice tight. "What is this about?" I rose slowly, meeting his gaze before extending the envelope. "This is the formal letter. I wanted to give you a copy in person." Clara took it before he could, sliding a manicured nail under the seal. Her eyes skimmed the page, and her lips curved, not in surprise but something closer to amusement. "So you're reclaiming the house," she said, her tone almost conversational. "Just like that." I kept my voice steady. "It's my home. I've been more than generous letting you both stay here, but that generosity has been taken for granted." Liam frowned. "Mom, if this is about the other night, it's about every night," I cut in, my hands tightening at my side. "About years of being dismissed, sidelined, made to feel like I don't belong in the very place your father and I built. I won't be treated as an outsider in my own home." Clara's gaze flicked up from the letter, cool and appraising. "This sounds like punishment, Annette. Vindictive. Honestly, a little bitter." Her words slid toward me like knives, but I refused to flinch. "No, it's boundaries, something I should have said a long time ago." For a moment, the room was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. Liam shifted his weight, glancing between us. "Mom," he began, softer now, "this is serious. Where are we supposed to go? What happens to the kids?" "I'm not throwing you out tonight," I said, "but things will change. If you want to stay, it will be under terms that respect me as part of this family. No more decisions without me. No more making me invisible. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly, though her posture remained relaxed. And if we don't agree to your terms, I held her gaze, then you'll need to find somewhere else to live. Clara leaned back against the arm of the couch, folding her arms. Or, she said lightly, you can back down, because if you don't, you'll never see us again. Liam, the kids, were done. No visits, no holidays. The air seemed to press in around me, the weight of her words heavier than I expected. My breath caught, but I forced my voice to remain calm. If you think that threat will scare me into silence, you don't know me as well as you think. Liam's brow furrowed. Clara, no, Liam, she said, her tone sharp now. Your mother has made her choice. I looked at him then, at the boy I'd raised into a man who now stood between his wife and his mother, torn and uncertain. I haven't made a choice, Liam, I said quietly. I've made a stand. There's a difference. He swallowed hard, glancing at the letter still in Clara's hand. This isn't something we can just walk back from. Exactly, Clara murmured, almost to herself. I stepped forward, taking the letter from her fingers. I know what I'm risking, but I'd rather risk everything than keep living like a guest in my own life. Clara's smile returned, small, almost pitying. Then here's my ultimatum, Annette. Back down, or you lose Liam forever. Clara's words hung in the air like smoke, as Liam stood frozen between us, waiting to see which one of us would move first. Liam's silence was louder than any argument. He wasn't speaking to me, and neither was Clara. The first day without a word from Liam felt like a pause, a breath held in the middle of an argument. By the third day, it was something else entirely, a heavy, deliberate quiet that followed me from room to room. I saw them in passing, Clara's car gone most mornings, Liam's truck in the driveway when I came home from errands. We moved like shadows in the same space, never crossing paths for more than a moment. If I passed Liam in the hall, he'd glance down at his phone or pretend to adjust his watch. Clara didn't bother pretending. She'd just look through me, like I was a smudge on a window she had no intention of cleaning. Once I left a plate of cookies on the kitchen counter, an olive branch disguised in sugar. The next morning, the plate was gone, cookies untouched. The house felt colder without the usual background noise. The murmur of the television, Liam's deep laugh, even Clara's constant suggestions about how I should be doing things. Now there was just the ticking of the mantel clock and the creak of the floorboards when I moved. I thought about knocking on Liam's door, telling him we needed to talk, but every time I pictured it, I saw the look on his face the day I handed him that letter, confusion edged with betrayal, and I couldn't bring myself to break first. The silence became a test I hadn't agreed to and I refused to fail it. Instead, I started filling the quiet with my own life. I dusted off the sewing machine Thomas had given me for our 10th anniversary, the one I hadn't touched in years. I mended a stack of clothes I'd been meaning to fix, then started piecing together a quilt from old fabric scraps. The hum of the needle became its own kind of comfort. I took long walks through the neighborhood, nodding to the same dog walkers and joggers I'd seen for years, but never spoken to. Some stopped to chat, asking how I'd been. I gave them the polite version of the truth. Oh, you know, just keeping busy. But something in my voice must have carried more, because they lingered a little longer, offering warmth in the form of shared stories and neighborly gossip. When I stopped by the church one Saturday to drop off canned goods for the food drive, Mrs. Henderson caught my hand. "We've missed you at the quilting circle," she said. "You should come back. It's not the same without you." I promised I would, and for once I meant it. Evenings were the hardest. I'd sit at the kitchen table with a book, the lamp casting a small pool of light, while the rest of the house sat in shadow. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard would creak, and I'd hear the faint murmur of voices, Liam and Clara talking behind their closed door. I'd strain to catch words, but they stayed muffled, just out of reach. Some nights doubt crept in like a draft under the door. Was I being stubborn? Was this the hill I really wanted to die on? But then I'd remember Clara's smug tone, the way Liam had stood frozen between us, and I'd feel that same spark of resolve catch fire again. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about the years I'd spent shrinking myself so other people could feel comfortable. I was done with that. Word of my situation made its way through the grapevine, and to my surprise, people rallied around me. Neighbors brought over pies and casseroles. Friends from the quilting circle sent me cards. Even my old coworker, Marlene, called to say, "Good for you, Annette." About time someone stood up to that woman. I didn't ask how she knew. In small towns, news travels faster than sense. 3 weeks into the silence, I was sorting through fabric when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. It was late, and the caller ID showed an unfamiliar number, but something made me pick up. Annette? It was Michael, my lawyer. His voice was brisk, but there was an edge to it. "There's been a new development regarding the house. We need to talk." Annette grips the phone tighter, sensing that whatever comes next will change everything. I wasn't surprised when Clara launched a legal challenge. She always played dirty. Michael's voice over the phone had been steady, but in person the weight in his eyes told me everything before he even spoke. We sat across from each other in his office, the winter light stretching long shadows across the polished wood desk. Without a word he slid a folder toward me. The tab read, "Connolly v. Harper." Inside was a petition, formal, clinical, each sentence stripped of warmth, but the meaning was crystal clear. Clara was contesting my legal claim to the house, insisting it was a marital asset belonging to her and Liam. She's arguing that living there, contributing to maintenance and expenses, gives them equal interest. Michael said evenly. A humorless smile tugged at my mouth. She means buying groceries with my money and rearranging my furniture. He didn't answer that. It's a weak argument, but she's betting you won't want to fight. She's hoping you'll settle. The knock on my door 2 days later was expected. The man who served me was polite, but the thick envelope he handed over felt heavier than its weight. I thanked him out of habit, and closed the door quietly. Upstairs, behind the lace curtain in the bedroom window, the fabric shifted. Clara was watching. By the end of the week, the silence in my home had been replaced by whispers in town. At the grocery store, 2 women in the baking aisle lowered their voices when I passed. At the diner, someone said I was cruel to throw my own son out of his childhood home. They didn't know about the years of small erasures, the steady trimming away of my place in my own life. The Springfield Gazette ran a short piece with the headline, "Local Family in Bitter Property Dispute." They even printed an old photo of me standing in front of the maple trees Thomas and I had planted. The caption made it sound as if the trees were just another item on the list of contested assets. The attention drained me. I couldn't run an errand without someone offering sympathy or unsolicited advice. Some meant well, others didn't. All of it pressed on me like a weight I couldn't shrug off. When I met Michael again, his advice was straightforward. "We can settle. Keep you in the house with agreed conditions. Avoid court. It will be easier." I shook my head before he'd even finished. "This isn't about easy. If I compromise now, Clara will have won. And this isn't just about the house. It's about the principle of being respected in my own home." Michael studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we prepare for trial." Preparation meant digging through boxes in the attic for mortgage records, utility bills, photographs of Thomas and me, laying the foundation, every receipt from the contractor, every scrap of proof that this house was built and maintained by our hand. Evenings became a blur of papers spread across the dining table. The lamplight threw long shadows over the documents, as if the house itself was watching. Upstairs, I could hear Clara laughing, a brittle sound that seemed to cut through the ceiling. I imagined her rehearsing her story for court, polishing it until she was the wronged one. She was good at that, but this time I had more than quiet tolerance. On the morning of our first procedural meeting, I wore the navy blazer Thomas always said made me look like I could run the whole county. The courthouse steps were slick with frost, my breath visible in the pale air. Inside, the conference room smelled faintly of burnt coffee. Clara sat across from me with her lawyer, her posture loose, almost bored. She didn't need to speak, her eyes said it all. "You won't win." I held her gaze until she looked away. When the meeting ended, Michael's phone buzzed. He stepped into the hall, listening in silence before returning. "The judge has reviewed the filings," he said. "He's decided to schedule a hearing." The judge schedules a hearing. Annette prepares for a long, hard fight. The courtroom was cold, but I was prepared to make it my battlefield. The chill in the courtroom wasn't just from the air conditioning, it was the kind of cold that came from polished marble, high ceilings, and the quiet hum of tension. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Michael, my hands resting flat on the smooth surface, as if anchoring myself to it. Across the aisle, Clara adjusted her blazer, her hair styled into perfect waves, her expression carefully neutral. The bailiff called the case and the judge entered, robes swaying, eyes scanning the room. His gavel struck once, sharp enough to silence the low murmur of spectators in the back rows. Clara's lawyer went first, his voice steady, practiced, as he began to spin their version of events. "This is a matter," he said, "of a mother abusing her control over a property to manipulate her son and fracture a family. My clients have contributed significantly to the upkeep of this home. They have invested financially, emotionally, and practically. To force them out now would be not only unjust but deeply harmful." I kept my gaze fixed forward, but each word felt like a stone being placed deliberately on my chest. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Liam sitting in the second row behind Clara, hands clasped, expression unreadable. He hadn't agreed to testify. That cut deeper than I'd expected. When it was Michael's turn, his voice was calm but edged with steel. The home in question was purchased, built and maintained by my client and her late husband. It is in her name alone. What's at stake here is not merely property, it is the right to live without being erased in one's own home. Over the years, there has been a documented pattern of behavior by Mrs. Connolly. He gestured toward Clara, that has been dismissive, exclusionary, and frankly manipulative. He laid out the evidence methodically, receipts, photographs, statements from neighbors who'd witnessed confrontations. There were even text messages Clara had sent to friends, mocking me for being too sentimental about the old place. Clara's lawyer objected. The judge allowed it, but not before glancing at the exhibits with clear interest. When Clara took the stand, her tone was smooth, almost sympathetic, as if this were all just an unfortunate misunderstanding. She described me as controlling and difficult, insisting that she had only ever tried to help maintain the house and keep the family together. Listening to her, I felt an odd detachment, as though she were talking about someone else entirely. But when she implied that I was using the house as a weapon to punish Liam, I felt the heat rise in my chest. Michael leaned toward me. "You'll have your turn," he murmured. When I did, I looked directly at the judge. "This house isn't a bargaining chip. It's my home. My husband and I built it with our own hands. I've welcomed my son and his family into it. What I will not do is live as a guest in my own life, subject to decisions I have no say in." My voice stayed steady, but inside, my heart pounded. I knew every person in that room was weighing my words. Not just the judge, but the neighbors in the gallery, the family members who'd shown up on one side or the other. Some faces were warm with quiet encouragement, others were set in judgment. Liam never looked away from me, but he didn't nod, didn't smile. He just listened, his expression carved from stone. By the time both sides had finished, I felt drained, as though every muscle in my body had been wrung out. The judge leaned forward, hands folded. "Given the complexity of the arguments presented today, I will reserve judgment." His eyes moved from one table to the other. "A ruling will be issued at a later date." The judge announces that the ruling will be delayed, leaving Annette in suspense. A surprise revelation in the case turned everything upside down. Was Clara hiding something from everyone? 3 days after the hearing, I was in the middle of hemming a quilt edge when the phone rang. Michael's name lit up the screen. His voice was sharper than usual, like he was holding back the urgency in it. "I need you to come in," he said without preamble. "We've found something." The words tugged at my chest. By the time I reached his office, a manila folder was already waiting on his desk. He didn't make small talk, just opened it and turned the documents toward me. "These came from a routine review of the family trust records," he explained. "They weren't part of Discovery because Clara filed them under a separate entity name. But look at the signatures." I leaned close. My name was absent. Clara's was not. Page after page showed withdrawals, property transactions and account transfers, none of which I'd ever heard about. "She's been moving assets out of the trust for years," Michael continued, his voice low. in amounts just small enough to avoid scrutiny. She's even transferred funds into an account in her maiden name. For a moment I could only stare. The documents blurred, my breath caught somewhere between disbelief and fury. And Liam. There's no indication he knew, Michael said. If he did, it's not in writing. The betrayal was twofold. Part satisfaction that Clara's facade had a crack, part deep ache that the family trust Thomas and I had built was just another thing she'd been quietly gutting. By the time I drove home, the frost on the fields was beginning to melt into mist. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they ached. I thought of every holiday dinner where Clara had smiled across the table, every polite conversation we'd had about managing family resources, all while she was siphoning pieces of our legacy away. That night, the house felt smaller, the air heavier. Upstairs, I heard Liam's muffled voice and Clara's clipped responses. I wondered if she sensed that her careful control was slipping. The next morning, Michael called again. We're filing a motion to amend our case. This changes everything. And it did. The moment the new evidence was submitted, the tone of the proceedings shifted. Word traveled fast. At the courthouse cafe, I overheard a reporter muttering to her colleague, "This could blow the whole thing open." Clara didn't show up at the next pre-trial conference, sending her lawyer instead. He looked drawn, irritable. "My client disputes the authenticity of these documents," he said, his voice cutting across the table. Michael stayed unruffled. "They're originals from the trust's own accounting records. Dated, signed, and notarized. Unless your client is claiming she forged her own signature." He let the words hang there. I watched the other lawyer's jaw tighten. That evening, I returned home to find Clara in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. Her eyes tracked me as I set down my bag. "You think you've found something that will save you," she said quietly. "But you've got it wrong. You always get it wrong." Her tone was brittle, sharp enough to cut. "Those documents don't prove anything," she went on. "And when this is over, you're going to look like a liar who fabricated evidence just to win." I met her gaze and saw the first flicker of unease and weak. "If that's true," I said evenly, "then you have nothing to worry about." But she did. I could feel it in the way her voice had lost that smooth, unshakable cadence. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized this was no longer just about the house. It was about dismantling the careful illusion Clara had built, not to humiliate her but to make sure she could never quietly strip someone else's life bare. Michael's email arrived just before midnight, confirming the court had accepted the new evidence into the record. My heart pounded as I read his last line. "Be ready. She's going to come at you harder now." Clara accuses Annette of fabricating the evidence, setting up a final showdown in court. This was the moment everything came down to: my family's future, my legacy, all on the line. The courthouse was busier than I'd ever seen it, the hallway outside our assigned courtroom buzzing with reporters, attorneys, and curious onlookers who had followed the case since the first headline. The double doors swung open, and I stepped inside with Michael at my side, the weight of months of battle pressing on my shoulders. Clara was already seated at her table, her blazer a pristine white that seemed chosen to radiate innocence. She didn't look at me, instead shuffling papers in front of her lawyer. Liam sat behind her, his face pale, his posture stiff, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles blanched. When the judge entered, the room fell silent, except for the shuffle of robes. His gavel landed once and the hearing began. Michael started with the new evidence, the trust records, the signature analysis, the withdrawals in Clara's maiden name. His voice carried without strain, each point laid with precision. He painted the picture of a calculated siphoning of assets, a slow bleed of a family legacy hidden under the guise of management. Clara's lawyer countered swiftly, his tone sharp, accusing me of fabricating documents to paint Clara as a villain. "This is a personal vendetta," he said, disguised as a legal matter. The judge allowed Clara to take the stand again. She spoke smoothly, insisting the documents were taken out of context, and claiming every transfer had been for the family's benefit. But her eyes flickered when Michael held up one particular ledger page with her signature, one she had just denied was hers. When it was my turn, I stood without looking at her. This isn't about spite, I told the judge. It's about my husband and I built that home, and I opened it to my son and his family. What I did not open it to was deceit, financial or otherwise. This house is my history, my sanctuary, and I will not be erased from it. My voice didn't shake though my hands trembled at my side. Before I stepped down, Liam rose unexpectedly from the bench. The judge allowed him to speak, and he moved slowly to the front of the courtroom. I didn't want to get in the middle, he began, his voice, but I've been watching, listening, and I can't ignore the feeling that I don't know the whole truth. He glanced back at Clara, then at me. If you've been lying to me, he said to her, about the trust, about the money, we're not just fighting over a house anymore. The tension in the room spiked. Clara's lips parted, but she didn't answer him. The judge cleared his throat, drawing every eye back to the bench. The air felt heavier with each second he spent shuffling his notes. This case, he began, has been fraught with personal history, conflicting accounts, and complicated family dynamics, but the law is clear. Ownership of the property rests with the plaintiff. My breath. However, he continued, in the interest of preserving what remains of this family, the court will impose one condition. Before full possession of the home is transferred, the plaintiff and defendant must engage in a reconciliation process. That includes mediation sessions and good faith efforts to restore civil relations. I sat back, the victory both sharp and bittersweet. I had the ruling, but not without a tether. A tether to the very person I had spent months disentangling myself from. Clara's lawyer nodded stiffly. Clara herself kept her gaze fixed on the table, her knuckles white against the edge of her folder. Liam's eyes found mine, searching, uncertain. The gavel fell once more, finalizing the decision. Annette faces a choice: reconcile with Clara, or let the distance grow even further. The choice wasn't just about the house, it was about the kind of woman I wanted to be. The courthouse steps were still slick with frost when I left that morning, the ruling echoing in my head. It should have felt like victory, but the condition, the forced reconciliation, clung to me like a wet coat I couldn't shake off. Back home, the house felt different, lighter in some ways, heavier in others. I wandered from room to room, touching the banister Thomas had carved, the kitchen counter worn smooth from years of family dinners. These were the things I had fought for. But now the judge's condition meant I would have to invite Clara back into more than just the house. I would have to let her into the quiet corners of my life again. Michael had called it an opportunity to rebuild. I wasn't sure I wanted to. 2 days later, Clara asked to meet. The request came through, Liam, his voice careful, as if the wrong inflection might push me to refuse. We agreed on neutral ground, a cafe on the edge of town, the kind with chipped mugs and a waitress who knew everyone's business. Clara was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth by the window. She looked different, not polished and perfect, but tired, her hair pulled back, a faint crease between her brows. For a moment I wondered if she felt as worn down by all this as I did. We ordered coffee, the silence stretching until she broke it. I'm sorry. The words were soft, tentative, as if she were testing them for weight. For the way I treated you, for not making you feel like family. It wasn't the sweeping confession I'd imagined, but it was I studied her face, searching for the telltale flicker of performance, the false warmth I'd seen so many times before. I couldn't tell if it was there. I don't know if I can trust you, I said finally. The truth hung between us, heavy but necessary. She nodded once as if she'd expected that. I don't expect you to, not yet. We talked stilted at first, then haltingly about the kids, about Liam, about the family we'd both been trying to claim in different ways. Every so often I caught myself thinking how much easier it would be to end it here, to walk away with my house and my dignity intact. But I knew what that would cost Liam, and the grandchildren who had no part in any of this. When the conversation drifted into silence again, I thought about Thomas. He had been a man who believed in second chances, even for people who didn't seem to deserve them. I wondered what he would tell me now. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about erasing what had happened. It was about choosing not to let it harden me into someone I didn't recognize. I'm willing to try, I said slowly. Not for you, not even for Liam, but for the family we both say we want. Something in her posture shifted, like she'd been bracing for refusal and didn't quite know how to handle acceptance. "I can work with that," she said. We left the cafe with no hugs, no promises, just a fragile understanding that this would be a long road and that neither of us would walk it easily. That night I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the streetlight glow across the snow-dusted lawn. The house was mine again. The fight was over, but the work ahead might be harder than the battle I'd just won. Annette feels a sense of peace, but is it too late for the relationship to ever fully heal? The past was behind me now. It was time to build a future that honored who I really was. January melted into February, the snow receding in patches to reveal the stubborn green underneath. I woke each morning to light spilling through the east-facing windows and the faint smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. For the first time in years, the house felt like it belonged wholly to me, not because of a court order, but because I'd claimed it in my heart. I started small. I pulled my old address book from the drawer, its pages soft from decades of use, and began dialing numbers I hadn't called in years. Lunch with Marlene at the cafe downtown. A Saturday visit with my cousin Ruth, who still lived in the farmhouse she'd grown up in. Afternoons spent laughing with women from the quilting circle, our fingers flying as we pieced together something beautiful from scraps. The house itself changed too. I painted the upstairs hallway a pale blue Thomas had always liked, but we'd never gotten around to. I moved Clara's chosen furniture into the garage, replacing it with pieces that carried stories, my grandmother's rocking chair, a battered cedar chest that smelled faintly of lavender when you opened it. It wasn't about erasing anyone, it was about writing myself back in. Travel had always been something Thomas and I talked about someday. I decided someday was now. I booked a weekend in Charleston, wandering cobblestone streets lined with pastel houses, the air rich with salt and magnolia. In March I joined a tour through the Southwest, standing on the rim of the Grand Canyon at sunset, the horizon burning gold. Each trip made me lighter, my world bigger. The quiet in my home no longer felt like absence, it felt like space. The family was mending, if not seamlessly. Liam brought the kids over twice a month. Clara kept her visits brief, her voice polite but guarded. We didn't talk about the court case. We didn't talk much at all. And that was fine. For now, boundaries had become my quiet anchor. I learned to say no without apology, to decline a request, to step back from conversations that went nowhere. It was a kind of freedom I hadn't realized I'd been missing. One afternoon, while pruning the maple trees out front, I caught myself humming the same song Thomas used to sing under his breath when he worked outside. The sound startled me. It had been years since music had just slipped out of me. Spring pushed in warm and insistent. The quilt I'd been working on through the winter was finally finished, its colors bright as a garden in bloom. I draped it across the back of the couch, a small but undeniable proof that my hands could still make something beautiful. On the first truly warm Saturday, I hosted friends for lunch on the back deck. We drank iced tea and ate lemon bars while the wind teased the edges of the tablecloth. Laughter rolled easily, without the undercurrent of tension I'd grown used to during family gatherings. When the last guest left, I lingered outside, listening to the evening settle in. The maple leaves shivered overhead, and the house behind me seemed to exhale. This wasn't the ending I'd imagined all those months ago, but it was mine. My life was no longer about reacting to someone else's decisions. It was about choosing my own. I stood in the middle of my living room that night, the lamplight soft against the quilt, the photographs on the mantel catching a warm glow. There was still distance in some relationships, still conversations left unfinished. But for the first time, that didn't feel like failure. It felt like living. Annette, standing in her home, feels proud of the legacy she's built, not from wealth, but from strength. Sometimes the hardest part of starting over is realizing just how far you've come. It was early summer when I finally stopped bracing for storms that never came. The maples outside were thick with green, their shadows dappling the lawn, and the air carried that soft hum of a season in full swing. One morning over coffee on the back deck, I realized I couldn't remember the last time my first thought of the day had been about Clara. I still remembered everything, the sting of her words, the exhaustion of the court battle, but it no longer defined the hours between sunrise and sleep. I had moved beyond surviving. I was building. The memoir began as a whisper of an idea, jotted notes in the margins of my old recipe books. At first I thought I was only writing for myself, a way to put my memories in order, but as the pages filled, I saw something else taking shape. A story of how a woman could lose her footing and still find her way back to solid ground. Every afternoon I sat at my desk by the window, the clack of the keys mingling with the rustle of leaves outside. Some days the writing felt like lancing an old wound. Other days it was like threading beads, each sentence small but deliberate, part of something larger. The idea for the charity came in a single moment. I was talking with Marlene after church, and she mentioned a neighbor who was going through a rough patch and could use someone to talk to. The words settled in me like a seed. By autumn, Second Foundation was official. A small non-profit dedicated to helping women reclaim their independence after family or financial upheaval. We started with 3 volunteers and a borrowed office space above the hardware store. Our first donation drive brought in more clothes and canned goods than I'd dared hope for. Each time a woman walked in, eyes wary, voice low, I saw pieces of myself from those first months after Thomas died, after Clara moved in. And each time one of them left a little straighter, a little more certain, I felt something in me settle. Travel remained my other constant. I wandered through narrow streets in Lisbon, the smell of roasting chestnuts curling in the air. I stood barefoot on a beach in Maine, the Atlantic icy around my ankles. I let myself be small under vast skies and loud seas, and I carried those moments home like treasures. With each mile, with each new face and place, my sense of self grew sturdier. I no longer weighed my worth against anyone's approval, least of all my family's. I could love them without letting them decide who I was. Even the house seemed to reflect that change. The garden bloomed brighter. The rooms felt warmer. The photographs on the mantel had shifted, still some of the old ones, but now mixed with snapshots from my travels. Smiling faces from the charity, a picture of me at the Grand Canyon with the sun setting behind me. I wasn't naive. I knew life would always offer new challenges, that peace was something you had to choose again and again, but I'd proven to myself that I could choose it, and keep choosing it on my own. Late one evening, as I was closing my laptop after finishing another chapter of the memoir, the phone rang. The sound startled me. These days most people text first. I crossed the room and answered. "Mom?" Liam's voice was tentative, like he wasn't sure how I'd receive it. I was wondering if we could meet, just the 2 of us. I gripped the edge of the counter, my heartbeat quickening. His tone held no edge, no accusation, just something I couldn't quite name. Annette stands in the quiet kitchen, the receiver warm against her ear, wondering if this call means their relationship has finally come full circle, or if it's the start of something entirely new. It was the choice that would define everything, the future of our family, or the future of my peace. We met at the same cafe where Clara and I had sat months before. The rain had just started when I arrived, blurring the world outside into shifting shades of gray. Liam was already there, hunched over his coffee, a paper napkin folded and refolded between his hands. When he looked up, there was something in his expression I hadn't seen in years. Uncertainty, yes, but also a kind of rawness, as if he'd stripped away whatever armor he usually wore around me. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't," I admitted, sliding into the booth across from him. The air between us was thick with the weight of everything unsaid. He didn't start with apologies or excuses. Instead, he talked about the quiet that had settled in our lives since the court case, the phone calls that never happened, the holidays that felt half empty. "I don't want it to stay like this," he said finally. "I want us, whatever's left of it." His words stirred something I hadn't wanted to face. I'd fought hard for my independence, for the space to breathe without needing anyone's approval, but I'd also missed him, missed the boy who used to run barefoot through our yard, hair wild, face split into that unstoppable grin. "I don't know if we can go back," I said. "Maybe not," he agreed, "but maybe we can go forward." Curlent. Major twist on 3. He hesitated, then took a slow breath. "There's something I need to tell you about before the trial. Clara didn't just file the lawsuit on her own. I knew about it before it happened." The words landed like a stone in my chest. "You." I stopped, my voice catching. "You knew?" I thought it would never get that far. I thought I could talk her out of it before it reached you. But when she pushed, I didn't stop her. I told myself I was protecting the kids, keeping the peace. But really I was avoiding the fight. I stared at him, the clink of dishes and hiss of the espresso machine filling the space between us. This was the peace I hadn't known, the shadow under every argument, every tense silence. He had stood at the edge of the storm and chosen not to pull me back. I can't pretend that doesn't hurt, I said quietly. I know, he replied. And I'm not asking you to, I'm asking for the chance to do better. I thought about the boundaries I'd built, hard-won lines I refused to let anyone cross again. Loving him didn't mean surrendering those. Maybe reconciliation wasn't about erasing the damage, but learning how to live with the cracks. I'm willing to try, I said at last, my voice steady, but on my terms, no decisions about me without me. No silence when something's wrong. And if Clara wants to be part of this, she has to respect that. His shoulders dropped, a breath leaving him like he'd been holding it for months. I can do that. We talked for another hour, circling the safe topics first, work, the kids, the new maple sapling he'd planted in their yard. Every so often the conversation drifted toward the jagged places, and we didn't look away. When we stepped outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and gleaming. The air smelled clean, new. As Liam hugged me goodbye, he said, "There's more I want to tell you, but it should be face to face with Clara there too." I stood on the wet sidewalk, watching him walk away, knowing that whatever came next could either mend us completely or break us for good. The family wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough. It started with cautious gestures, a photo of the kids texted to me on a Tuesday afternoon, a short phone call from Liam about his work trip, Clara's quick nod when we crossed paths at a school event. No grand reconciliations, no sweeping speech, just small, deliberate steps that felt fragile enough to crack under too much weight. When Liam invited me for dinner 3 weeks later, I almost said no, but the memory of our last conversation at the cafe, his voice steady but vulnerable, made me pause. I baked lemon bars, the kind he loved as a boy, and carried them to their house like an offering. Clara opened the door. She didn't force a smile, but she didn't close it either. "Come in," she said, her tone polite, not warm, but something in her eyes had shifted, less guarded, more curious. The evening was careful. We talked about the children's school projects, Liam's new work contract, the repairs they'd made to their porch. Clara asked about my travels, and for the first time in years her questions didn't feel like tests. She listened, really listened, to my answers. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was movement. The invitation for the celebration came a month later. Liam's idea, though Clara had been the one to call. Just a small gathering, she said. Family, a few friends, no speeches. I brought a bouquet of tulips from my garden and set them in the center of their kitchen table. The house buzzed with quiet laughter, the clink of glasses, the sound of kids running up and down the hall. Liam moved through the crowd easily, refilling drinks, introducing me to neighbors I'd never met. Clara stayed mostly in the kitchen, but every so often she'd glance at me and offer a small nod, like we were acknowledging some invisible progress chart only the two of us could see. At one point, Liam brought the kids over. "Grandma, tell them about the maple trees," he said, and I found myself recounting the story of planting them with Thomas, the blisters, the rain, the way we'd stood back afterward, muddy and proud. The children listened, wide-eyed, and when I finished, Clara smiled faintly. It was such a small thing, but in that moment, I felt a thread stitch through the frayed edges of our family. Later, standing by the window with a cup of coffee, I watched Liam and Clara clear plates together, their movements easy, unforced. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be without bumps. Resentments don't vanish. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight, but I also knew I was no longer carrying the full weight alone. There was satisfaction in that, and a little sadness too. Some relationships would always have fault lines, no matter how carefully you patched them, but I was learning to live with those cracks, to see them as part of the shape of us. When the night wound down, Liam walked me to the door. "Thanks for coming," he said. It meant a lot. I believed him. Driving home, the moon hung low over the fields, casting the road in silver. The house waited for me, warm light spilling from its windows, the familiar creak of the porch step greeting me like an old friend. I set my keys on the counter, listening to the quiet settle around me. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for a fight or rehearsing a defense. The family's future wasn't mine to control. It never had been. But I had my place in it again, and that was enough. I stepped onto the porch, the night air cool against my skin, and looked out at the darkened street. Whatever came next, good or bad, I felt ready, empowered. The kind of ready that comes from knowing you've already survived worse. The future is uncertain, but one thing is clear: I've built my legacy on my own terms. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, turning the steam from my coffee into a ribbon of gold. I leaned against the counter, scanning the calendar pinned beside the fridge. It was filled now, not with doctor's appointments or obligatory family dinners, but with speaking engagements, charity fundraisers, and trips I'd booked for no one's sake but my own. The charity had outgrown its borrowed office above the hardware store. Second Foundation now occupied a sunny space downtown, its walls lined with shelves of donated clothes, food, and books. Women came in with stories written in the slump of their shoulders, and left carrying more than bags. They carried the knowledge that someone believed them capable. I recognized that transformation because I'd lived it. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of donated coats, I overheard a volunteer tell a newcomer, "If you want to know what resilience looks like, talk to a..." I didn't interrupt, but the words settled in my chest like something warm and steady. At night I returned to the book I'd been writing, not just a memoir now, but a guide. The chapters wove my personal story through practical advice, the kind I wished someone had given me when I was drowning in silence and doubt. It was slow work but deliberate, like quilting, each piece measured, trimmed, and sewn into place. My new family had taken shape almost without my noticing. There was Marlene, who could make me laugh so hard iced tea threatened to shoot out my nose, Ruth, whose no-nonsense advice landed like gospel, and Nora, a retired teacher who'd started volunteering with the charity and brought with her a calm wisdom that smoothed rough edges on the worst days. They didn't care about my last name, my marital history, or the whispers that still drifted through town. They cared about the woman in front of them. The house reflected this new life. The garden spilled color onto the lawn, bright zinnias, lavender, and the stubborn maple saplings I'd planted just because I could. The guest room, once kept tense and tidy in case Liam or Clara decided to visit, was now filled with fabrics, travel guides, and stacks of drafts for the book. One Saturday in late summer, I hosted an open house for the charity's supporters. The deck was strung with lights, the air scented with grilled corn and peaches. Guests lingered over dessert, sharing stories of small victories, new jobs, safe apartments, first vacations in years. I moved among them, listening, laughing, offering hugs where they were wanted. It struck me then, I had fought so hard to keep my place in one kind of family, only to discover I could build another from scratch. One made of choice, not obligation. Liam and I still spoke, more often now, our conversations steady if not yet deep. Clara remained polite, distant, and I was fine with that. Some doors didn't need to be flung open again, a cracked one was enough to let in the air. As summer began to fade, the manuscript reached its final chapter. I typed the last sentence late one night, the house silent around me. When I pressed save, a strange lightness filled me, like setting down a heavy box I'd been carrying for years. The next morning, I walked through the house slowly, coffee in hand, touching the objects that told my story: Thomas's rocking chair, the quilt from last winter, a photo of me at the Grand Canyon. None of it was perfect, but all of it was mine. The phone rang, and I let it go to voicemail. This moment wasn't for anyone else. I opened the front door, breathing in the scent of cut grass and distant rain. The skies stretched wide and clear above me. I stepped across the threshold, closing the door behind me, not to shut anyone out, but to mark the line between what was and what would be. My past was complete, my future waited, and I was walking toward it on my own terms.